On November 12, 1942, in the western desert of North Africa, a captured American vehicle sat abandoned near the wreckage of a British supply column, its crew having fled when their position became untenable. Standard Wehrmacht procedure called for its destruction or abandonment, but the reconnaissance unit's commanding officer had other ideas. "Get our best mechanic," he ordered. "I want to know if we can use this thing." Within 30 minutes, the Afrika Korps mechanics discovered something that challenged everything they believed about German engineering superiority. The revelation came gradually as they examined the vehicle. A small placard on the dash read Willys MB. The Americans called it a Jeep. Lifting the hood, the first thing they noticed was the immaculate engine compartment, designed for rapid maintenance by anyone with basic mechanical knowledge, color-coded wires, clearly labeled components, and easily accessible parts revealed a design philosophy focused on simplicity and speed rather than precision. In 2 decades of servicing German vehicles, the senior mechanic had never seen such practical engineering. Every bolt was standard, every part identical, built for mass production and effortless replacement. The Go Devil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM, not impressive by German standards, yet revolutionary in concept. It wasn't made to be perfect, but to be simple, reliable, and easily producible. A mechanic with minimal training could service it using basic tools, no specialized wrenches, and no factory expertise. The Americans, it seemed, had designed this machine with the expectation that farmers and factory workers would maintain it under combat conditions. By late 1942, the contrast between American and German design philosophy was stark. The US would build more than 640,000 Jeeps during the war, while Germany produced just over 50,000 Kübelwagens. This disparity reflected something deeper. The Jeep embodied the American approach to manufacturing, standardized, simplified, and built for mass production using interchangeable parts. When officers arrived to inspect it, one asked, "Can we use it?" The senior mechanic hesitated. "This vehicle is remarkable," he said carefully. "It's designed by someone who understands field conditions." A skeptical officer insisted that German engineering was the finest in the world, but the mechanic only pointed to the transfer case. "Look at this. One lever engages 4-wheel drive. One lever. Our Kübelwagens require multiple operations, and most don't have 4-wheel drive at all." The Volkswagen Type 82 Kübelwagen, designed by Ferdinand Porsche, was lighter, more fuel-efficient, and its air-cooled engine was immune to radiator damage, yet it suffered from one fatal flaw: rear-wheel drive only. In the soft sands of Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the mud of Russia, that limitation was catastrophic. The Jeep, by contrast, could engage all 4 wheels instantly, simple enough for any soldier to operate within minutes. Its suspension used crude leaf springs instead of Porsche's torsion bars, but they were vastly easier to repair in the field. Its electrical system was basic but dependable, and the fuel system could run on almost any gasoline. Even its extra weight, 2,450 pounds to the Kübelwagen's 5-teen Forded, proved advantageous, translating into rugged durability. The Americans had built for abuse, overloading, and harsh conditions, prioritizing survivability over efficiency. This wasn't the American incompetence German propaganda had promised. This was engineering grounded in realism. Over the next 3 days, the mechanics tested the Jeep extensively, driving it through sand, overloading it, and pushing it beyond limits that crippled most vehicles. It handled everything. Its low-range gearing allowed it to crawl over obstacles at walking pace, outperforming the German reduction hubs. Word spread quickly through the Afrika Korps. The Americans had created a vehicle that exceeded the Wehrmacht's in nearly every meaningful way. Other units came to inspect it, first skeptical, then impressed, and finally uneasy. One former automotive engineer, now a supply officer, studied the vehicle for hours before concluding bluntly, "This represents a fundamental difference in philosophy. We build for perfection. The Americans build for production. In total war, that matters more." He pointed out the cast engine block, cruder, yes, but faster to make. Semi-skilled workers could assemble it in a fraction of the time needed for a German engine. The stamped metal body panels were plain, but could be mass-produced by factories that once made washing machines. The Americans had mobilized their entire economy. Every plant, from refrigerators to trucks, had been converted to wartime use. Germany could not compete. Reports like this flooded German intelligence from every front. The Americans were producing vehicles, ships, and planes at scales beyond comprehension. By late 1942, studies confirmed the grim truth. American factories were building thousands of vehicles daily. Ford's Willow Run plant produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes, and Liberty ships were launched faster than the Kriegsmarine could sink them. In 1942 alone, U.S. vehicle production surpassed that of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined, and was still accelerating. The captured Jeep became a prized asset within its unit, used for reconnaissance and supply runs. Soldiers competed to drive it, and when parts wore out, replacements were scavenged effortlessly from other captured Jeeps. Everything fit perfectly. By early 1943, dozens of Jeeps had been captured, and Wehrmacht mechanics created informal networks to share parts and repair tips. A black market even emerged, where a working Jeep fetched astonishing prices. But on May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners, and their education in American manufacturing had only just begun. During transport, the difference was obvious. American trucks hauled men in quantities that would have required horses in the Wehrmacht, and Liberty ships built in just weeks carried thousands across the Atlantic. At the processing center in Oran, captured mechanics watched in awe as young American soldiers serviced fleets of vehicles with ease. Dozens of jeeps, trucks, and command cars filled the motor pool, and spare parts flowed freely. Every bolt, wire, and component was standardized. An American sergeant who spoke some German noticed one prisoner observing. "You a mechanic?" he asked. "I was Afrika Korps vehicle maintenance," came the reply. The sergeant grinned. "Well, no war for you now, but come on, I'll show you around. Not like you can steal anything anymore." He explained the American philosophy openly. Everything was designed so that any farm boy could fix it. Most recruits had never seen an engine before training, so simplicity was paramount. Color-coded wires, standard bolts, clear labels, and manuals written for 6th grade reading levels. "If it breaks," the sergeant said, "anyone can fix it." The captured mechanic examined a Jeep engine, every piece marked, every instruction illustrated for clarity. "How many of these do you make?" he asked. The sergeant shrugged. "Thousands every week. They come off the line faster than we can ship 'em. If one breaks, we just grab another." The German could scarcely believe it. The motor pool held more vehicles than entire divisions of the Wehrmacht, and this was only one forward base. Around him were Dodge trucks, half-tracks, and tank carriers, each built from common parts. "Thing is," the sergeant added, "we learned from the last war. We build everything with common components. A bolt from a Jeep fits a truck, fits a half-track. The same principle applied to electrical parts, hydraulic systems, and everything else. It made logistics simple. Instead of requiring 1,000 different components, the Americans needed only a few hundred, which they produced by the millions. This was the secret German manufacturing had never fully understood. Component commonality wasn't just about production efficiency. It created an entire logistical ecosystem where any part could be used anywhere, and any mechanic could service any vehicle. The journey from North Africa to American prison camps continued that education. At every port and station, prisoners witnessed American industrial capacity operating on a scale that defied every German preconception. At Norfolk, Virginia, cranes loaded and unloaded thousands of tons of cargo daily with mechanical precision. Railroads moved prisoners across the United States in comfortable passenger coaches that would have been considered luxury in Germany. Everywhere they looked, vehicles filled the landscape, cars in factory parking lots, trucks in endless convoys, and depot yards packed with military machines awaiting shipment. At Camp Hearne, Texas, skilled mechanics among the prisoners volunteered for motor pool duty, welcomed by American commanders who needed every capable worker. For 2 years, German mechanics worked alongside American soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that kept the camp running. American mechanics approached their jobs with direct practicality. They weren't engineers chasing perfection. They were problem solvers focused on keeping equipment operational. When something broke, they fixed it quickly with whatever was available. If parts were missing, they improvised. When a vehicle was beyond repair, they stripped it for components and requested a replacement, which arrived in days, not weeks. The Germans watched closely. They had been trained to maintain vehicles to factory standards, using specialized tools and exact procedures. The Americans were trained to keep things running by any means necessary. In peacetime, German precision produced excellence. In wartime chaos, American improvisation proved far more effective. The motor pool processed hundreds of vehicles each month. Jeeps came in for servicing, were repaired within hours, and returned to duty the same day. Efficiency came from parts abundance and standardization. If a part failed, the shelves were full of replacements. If a tool was needed, it was immediately supplied. If a vehicle was lost, another stood ready. One German mechanic befriended an American who had worked for Ford before the war. "I was at Willow Run," the American explained, "Ford's bomber plant outside Detroit, the biggest factory in the world. We started building B-24 Liberators in '42, and by the time I got drafted, we were finishing one every hour." The numbers staggered the German. 24 bombers a day, over 700 a month. "How is that possible?" he asked. The American smiled. "Mass production. Mr. Pluction, Ford figured out how to break complex work into simple, repeatable steps. You don't need master craftsmen when every man installs one bolt in one place all day. Train 1,000 men to do one thing, and you get massive output." That was the essence of the difference. German production relied on expert craftsmen, building precise machines in moderate numbers. American production relied on semi-skilled laborers building adequate machines in enormous quantities. "Same thing with Jeeps," the American added. "Willys makes them, Ford makes them, identical specs. Apart from one fits the other. If one factory goes down, the other keeps producing. Every mechanic learns the same vehicle." The German thought of the Wehrmacht's endless variety of trucks and cars, each from different manufacturers, each requiring unique parts and training. Captured vehicles added even more confusion. German logistics were a maze of incompatible systems. American logistics, by contrast, were unified through standardization. "That's the real genius," said the American. "We designed for manufacturability from the start. When the Army wanted a Jeep back in '40, companies had 75 days to make a prototype. Bantam did it in '49, and Willys and Ford refined it for mass production. Every part had to be simple to make, simple to maintain, simple to repair. The German prisoners who had studied the Jeep firsthand understood. It wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but its simplicity made it unstoppable. Sophistication slowed production. Simplicity won wars. By the summer of 1944, rumors spread through the camps of an Allied invasion of France. When news of Operation Overlord's success arrived, few were surprised. The Allies had the industrial might to build a fleet in months that would have taken Germany years. Newspapers and radio reports described the staggering scale: thousands of ships and landing craft, tens of thousands of vehicles, all manufactured for a single operation. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave alone. Within weeks, millions of Allied troops fought across Europe, supplied by a production base that created new equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. The prisoners reflected on their pre-war confidence in German victory. That confidence had rested on the myth of German technological supremacy. Yes, German tanks were heavier, their aircraft often superior, their weapons finely crafted, but it no longer mattered. America could produce 5 tanks for every one German model, 10 trucks for every German truck, 100 jeeps for every Kübelwagen. One afternoon, the prisoners watched American soldiers load jeeps onto transport trucks bound for Europe. A single loading session, just another day at a Texas camp, put more vehicles on the road than an entire German division had possessed in North Africa, and that scene was repeated daily across America. The numbers were crushing. In 1943, Germany produced fewer than 100,000 military vehicles. That same year, the United States, while still maintaining a civilian economy, produced over 2 million. The difference was more than quantity. It was philosophy. American vehicles were built for war, rugged, simple, and easily maintained. German vehicles were built for peace, precise, refined, and ill-suited to endless combat. By late 1944, news reached the prisoners of a new German offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. It was Hitler's final gamble, dependent on captured Allied fuel, because Germany's own reserves were gone. Reports spoke of Operation Greif, Otto Skorsenny's commandos using captured American uniforms and jeeps to infiltrate Allied lines. The irony wasn't lost on the prisoners. Germany's best special forces now relied on American vehicles to fight. The operation failed, and the offensive collapsed as German tanks ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned vehicles, infantry returned to horse-drawn wagons, and the last hopes of victory disintegrated in the snow. By spring 1945, with Berlin encircled and Allied forces crossing the Rhine, the German mechanics at Camp Hearne kept working quietly, maintaining the vehicles of the army that had defeated them. They felt no pride, no bitterness, only understanding. Germany hadn't lost for lack of bravery or skill, but because it had challenged an industrial power beyond comprehension. In April, an American soldier brought news. Germany surrendered. War's over in Europe. The mechanics nodded. They'd expected it for months. "What happens to us now?" one asked. "You'll go home," the soldier said. "Not right away. There's a lot to sort out, but you'll go home." The mechanic looked down at his hands, calloused from years of work. Home to a Germany in ruins, its cities reduced to ash, its factories silent, and its dreams of superiority buried beneath the weight of American production. By 1945, the mechanic reflected on what the war had truly revealed. Germany's cities lay in ruins, destroyed by the same industrial might that had built the Jeep he had studied years earlier. One day, an American soldier asked him, "You're a smart guy, did you really think Germany could win?" The mechanic paused before answering. Before the war, yes, they had believed that German craftsmanship and engineering excellence would triumph over American quantity. They had seen American consumer goods before the war and found them inferior, assuming American military machines would be no different. But when he first examined that Jeep back in 1942, he realized they had made a critical mistake, confusing peacetime quality with wartime effectiveness. The Jeep wasn't superior to the Kübelwagen in engineering refinement, it was superior in design philosophy. It was built for rapid mass production, easy repair, and rugged field use, and in total war, those traits were decisive. The American nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we build adequate products quickly and in huge quantities." "Exactly," the mechanic replied. For a moment, the two stood silently, former enemies united by the shared understanding of what had truly determined the war's outcome. By late 1945, repatriation began. German prisoners boarded ships home, and by early 1946, the mechanic arrived in Bremen, a city reduced to rubble. Amid the devastation, he saw American trucks and jeeps everywhere, hauling relief supplies, transporting officers, and symbolizing the machinery of reconstruction. Approaching an Allied motor pool, he introduced himself to the American captain in charge. Speaking English learned during captivity, he explained that he had been an Afrika Korps vehicle mechanic, trained in maintaining American equipment at Camp Hearne, Texas. The captain reviewed his papers, and seeing his experience, hired him immediately. Germany needed work, the Allies needed mechanics, and so the former German soldier found himself maintaining the same vehicles he once regarded as enemy technology. Over the next year, he watched as Germany began to rebuild. American aid poured in, food, fuel, medicine, and construction materials, all delivered with the same logistical precision that had powered the Allied war effort. In the motor pool, he trained young Germans, many of them ex-soldiers, teaching them what he had learned in captivity: simplicity over sophistication, practicality over perfection, results over theory. By 1947, he was promoted to supervisor of the German civilian staff. His American commanding officer respected his expertise and one evening asked him, "If you were designing a vehicle for the new Germany, what would it look like?" The mechanic thought carefully. It would follow the American philosophy, adapted to Europe, smaller, fuel-efficient, but standardized, easy to produce and maintain. Common parts, simple maintenance, designed for manufacturability, he said. The captain smiled. "That's smart. Marshall Plan money will rebuild German industry, and your engineers are already studying our methods." He was right. In the decades that followed, West Germany adopted American-style production principles, but retained German precision. The result was an economic transformation. Volkswagen, which had once built the Kübelwagen, became a global powerhouse by merging American efficiency with German engineering. The Volkswagen Beetle, simple yet reliable, symbolized this new synthesis. Mechanics who had once worked in US prison camps became quiet architects of post-war German manufacturing. They brought home lessons about standardization, interchangeability, and design for mass production. Companies like Mercedes-Benz and BMW applied these ideas, streamlining parts, simplifying assembly, and focusing on practicality. By the 1950s, German factories were producing hundreds of thousands of vehicles annually, and West Germany had risen as a new industrial power. Even US historians took note. General George C. Marshall called the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. German generals interviewed after the war agreed. They admired not the B-17s or Sherman tanks, but the Jeep, because it embodied the philosophy that had truly won the war. While the Wehrmacht's Kübelwagen required detailed manuals and specialized knowledge, the Jeep could be driven and repaired by anyone. That simplicity was its genius. By the 1960s, veterans of the Afrika Korps gathered for reunions, reminiscing about the war and its machines. One mechanic observed, the Kübelwagen was better engineered, but the Jeep was better designed for modern war. Another veteran recalled capturing a Jeep in 1941, dismissing it as crude until he realized its simplicity was a form of brilliance. By 1943, he said, every unit wanted captured Jeeps, they just worked. A third man added quietly, when I learned America was producing more Jeeps in a week than we made Kübelwagens in a year, I knew we would lose, not in battle, but through mathematics. They could replace what we destroyed faster than we could destroy it. That was the enduring lesson. Engineering excellence loses to industrial adaptability in total war. The Jeep had not only conquered the battlefield, it had reshaped the post-war world. Throughout the war, Germany's logistical situation remained dire. By 1943, roughly 80% of its divisions still depended on horse-drawn transport. The Wehrmacht had entered the war with over 500,000 horses, and at its peak, employed 2.75 million horses and mules, with more than 1 million in active service at any given time. Over 2 million of them would perish before the conflict's end. In stark contrast, every American division was fully motorized. Their armies ran on gasoline, not hay. Trucks replaced wagons, and engines replaced hooves. This gave US forces enormous operational flexibility. Supply convoys could advance hundreds of kilometers in a single day, while German columns bound by the walking pace of horses rarely exceeded 30. After the war, German generals analyzing their defeat often pointed not to failed tactics or poor leadership, but to material disparity. German soldiers had fought bravely, and their officers had planned well, but no amount of skill could compensate for a lack of industrial power. The Jeep came to symbolize that imbalance. Every German soldier who encountered one understood its meaning, a vehicle so plentiful that Americans treated it as expendable, so reliable that it required little maintenance, so simple that any soldier could repair it, and so effective that German units used captured Jeeps whenever possible. In 1976, after 35 years of service, the US Army began replacing the Jeep with the new HMMWV. Even then, many Jeeps remained in use with reserve forces and allied militaries worldwide. That same year, Volkswagen rolled out its 1 millionth Golf, a car that, like the Beetle before it, reflected a marriage of German precision and American-style production efficiency. By the 1980s, West Germany had become one of the world's great industrial powers, exporting millions of vehicles each year. Its products retained German quality, but were now built with streamlined, efficient methods that owed much to lessons learned from American design philosophy. When the last Afrika Korps reunion took place in 1998, fewer than 24 veterans remained. They were men in their 70s and 80s, survivors of a war long past. At the gathering, someone mentioned that a nearby museum had restored a Willys MB Jeep. The group decided to visit. They stood quietly around the vehicle. Grey-haired men who had once faced it as enemies, now studying it with reverence. One reached out, tracing the hood's familiar curves with trembling fingers. I captured one of these in '42, he said softly. Used it for 3 months before I was wounded at El Alamein. Best vehicle I ever drove, better than anything we had. Another nodded. I examined one in Tunisia just before our surrender. Couldn't believe how simple it was. That's when I realized we'd been doing it wrong. Too complicated, too slow to build or fix. They made over 600,000 of these. A third man added, we built 50,000 Kübelwagens. That ratio told you everything. The room fell silent. Before them sat a museum piece. Its war long over, but to these veterans it represented far more. It was a monument to the production system that had defeated them, the functional engineering that had overwhelmed their precision, and the abundance that had crushed their scarcity. We never had vehicles like this, one said at last. Not in numbers, not with reliability, not built this way. We built for perfection, they built for production. That realization had been the Wehrmacht mechanic's greatest lesson, learned in the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the fields of France. The Jeep had been more than a machine, it had been an education. Captured German mechanics studied it, maintained it, and in doing so uncovered the industrial logic that had won the war. They learned that simplicity was strength, that design for mass production was more powerful than over-engineering, and that effectiveness outweighed elegance. Those insights, painfully gained, became the foundation of post-war Germany's reconstruction. Defeat had taught humility. American equipment taught functional thinking. Together they forged a new philosophy that served Germany far better than pre-war arrogance ever had. The story of the Wehrmacht mechanics and the Jeep is ultimately a story of learning through loss. Pride had once convinced them that German craftsmanship would prevail, that quality would triumph over quantity. The war taught them otherwise. American vehicles were rarely more advanced in engineering terms, but they were designed for the realities of modern warfare, built in massive quantities, maintainable by anyone, standardized and reliable even in harsh conditions. That practicality, multiplied by America's vast industrial output, created a force no amount of German skill or courage could overcome. The mechanics who worked on both German and American vehicles understood this firsthand. They saw two philosophies side by side and recognized which one sustained armies in total war. When they returned home, they applied those lessons. They trained apprentices to value standardization and simplicity, advised factories to focus on manufacturability, and designed products that prioritized reliability over aesthetic perfection. The engineers who rebuilt Germany's industrial base, many of them former soldiers and POWs, carried forward what they had observed in Allied motor pools and American factories. The result was a hybrid, German precision fused with American efficiency. By the 1970s, West Germany was one of the world's great exporters, its prosperity a living proof that it had learned from defeat. The Jeep's legacy lived on, not just as a military icon but as a teacher. Every interchangeable part, every assembly line built for reliability, every product designed to be functional rather than ornate, each carried traces of the lessons first learned by defeated German mechanics staring at a captured Jeep in the desert of 1942. That moment of humility became the seed of a national rebirth. The Jeep had not only won battles, it had reshaped how the world built its future.